Hi, David. How are you?
Hey Nina, I'm doing good. Just as good and just as bad as everyone else.
So, for those that don't know, I'm here with David Banks, who's the kind of mastermind behind the Rail Marathon. And for anyone who doesn't know you or your work, can you introduce yourself shortly and what you're about?
I'm a Glasgow-based artist. What that mainly includes is performance, parkour, and design. I tend to work across those three areas. Even more specifically, the space between those different areas, I guess, is like for me the most fertile ground for generating work, kind of putting ideas to life.
Can you talk through what you thought would be happening on the 21st of April this year and what ended up going on?
So I initially scheduled to do the full marathon at the end of last year, and I got injured playing football. My kneecap came off and on basically so I had a patella dislocation, and then I got back into training, postponed the marathon. So I haven't had a major injury in 10 years. I'm not like an injury prone person, so I kind of seen it as I'll be fine. I was doing a reverse vault over a rail, and when I put my leg down onto the ground and the alignment was fine, I went to change direction and it happened again, this time tearing a tendon, which sucks. So the original plan was for me to do the marathon and set a Guinness World Record and use all that buzz and energy to raise money for Freer Instinct and Selena Parkour, also known as Soul Parkour, which is part of Parkour One. So that was the original plan, but obviously things got derailed and it turned into something a little bit different.
Derailed, eh? So you said the marathon there. Can you explain what the marathon actually was?
The idea was to get a set piece of railing, which was going to be supported by access parkour. And I was going to do, it was something stupid like 1,200 lengths off the railing until I accumulated the distance off a marathon. I think one of the frustrating things about not doing that in the end is related to the training for it. The attempt was looking like it was going to last like 14 hours. So I was doing one long session a week off about 4 or 5 hours of rail balancing and 2 1 hour sessions a week. So just like everyone else, I've got a job, I've got a personal life and things like that. So to fit that much in on 2 like essentially 3-month camps to get derailed is just heartbreaking. So it was really frustrating in that sense because the attempt took so long. I had to train appropriately for it. But it turned into something a little bit different. A few of us put our heads together. We had, Charlotte from Freer Instinct, Madeline from Parkour One, Alan Tran from Enzo Movement, Hedge, a few kind of people that had been there from the start supporting it. And of course, Tim and Dan from Ukemi. And we put our heads together, so we were going to decide whether to postpone it again. For me to do a normal amount on like a low rail with crutches, so do like a mile myself with crutches, or open it up to the wider community. So I'm really glad we went for that option. I think any time that you do a project that involves a load of participants, it's really scary to put that sort of thing out there. As soon as I said, okay, we'll do a mile each and we need 25 people, what happens if you get 2? As soon as you set a figure that high, it's really sink or swim. But fortunately, amongst that core group, we all had like 1 or 2 people each that we knew would get involved. And it kind of just got momentum from that to the point that we just didn't say no to anyone. And we done 34 miles, which for anyone that's been to like a parkour event or like even like a Hell Night, we all know that 10 push-ups isn't 10 push-ups in parkour. It's more like 13 with like 2 pause push-ups and then 1 for the team at the end. It kind of like thematically worked that we'd done like way more miles than planned.
And you had folk from all over the world doing it, which is really cool.
Yeah, we had 13 different countries, which is really cool.
From what you had envisaged originally, you doing 26 miles all yourself to 34 people, did you say? Doing a mile is quite different. What has been your favourite part of the changes from what you originally envisioned to what turned up, and what was maybe hardest, if there was such a thing?
The best thing about it is we've kind of created like a mini tribe. Our little Facebook group is pretty lively. We've had chats back and forth. One of the participants, Georgi, me and him have been joking about how we're going to do climb ups to space. It's stimulated like lots of fun chat, and certain like connections have been made, which is really cool. I haven't traveled so much for training in recent years, and that was one of the feelings I kind of got from it. It also communicated how universally accessible the challenge and the image is. So Tim Pierce from Ukemi, for example, was like, I can only find a flat rail due to social distancing, so I'm going to do the whole thing with my hands behind my back. We had some like hardcore people that were being like, if I fall off, I'm going back to the start. And then we had some people that were maybe not quite as experienced with parkour that were doing small checkpoints, but had never even thought about balancing for a mile before. So despite it being a significantly shorter distance, like the challenge was still scalable. The hardest thing is negotiating footage from 34 people as fast as possible. One of the guys from Mumbai Parkour, he was just like, I literally can't go outside anymore. Like I might get arrested, you know. This is a little secret in on the video. Every video clip is legit from the marathon, except his is from his like 2011 edit, which we searched through his videos to find him bouncing on a rail. So we made it happen. On a personal level, it's a difficult change to stomach, kind of like building yourself up for that. And I guess that kind of segues quite nicely, like why I do this, why I've done this sort of thing in the past. I get huge benefits from it as well, mentally, physically, spiritually. We're going to go there, you know. So I'm disappointed I don't have that moment and that experience. But I do plan on doing it later this year. I'm just not going to make an event about it. I think that I have some plans on how it's going to get shown, but I can't announce it and get it delayed again. It's just one day. I'm going to let you all know it's done the marathon. Here's the recording. You know, I can't build myself up for that again.
Did you think, like, did you want to do the marathon to start with? Did you come out of that and think this is a challenge I want to do and it would be a good opportunity to raise money, I guess? Or were you like, I'm keen to do another sort of fundraising thing? What would be a challenge that would bring people together or encourage them to donate?
This answer will veer into poetic territory, but it starts a little bit more Scottish. When I done the cat crawl, I done that on like, I think it was like 8 or 9 days notice. I was steaming in halls of residence, like just moved to Glasgow. I think it was 18, 19 maybe. And people were speaking about the Haiti earthquake. I was like, oh, that's shit. People should do something about it. And then someone was like, well, you should do something about it then. And I was like, right, okay. And then I told a few people, still a bit drunk, that I was going to do it, see if they'd help me the next weekend. And then I woke up the next day and I was like, what have I done? What have I done? So initially I planned to do a half marathon quadruped. And I chose that because I didn't think it could be done. I didn't think I could do it. And I couldn't do it in the end. When I actually finished the quadruped, the 8 miles, I'd like my toes had dislocated. I'd done damage to my shoulders. I'd like done micro fractures in like my wrists. And I was on the toilet in the KFC around the corner from McCann Street. And I came out, and I've never actually told anyone this story, but it was just my dad in the toilet. And I cried. I was just like, I can't do it anymore. I couldn't wipe my ass properly. And I was like, this is bad. And I don't think that I suffer from depression. However, like I was very low for a long time after that. Like I received immediately no joy from that. What had happened was I was doing Lemps. For people that don't know, we raised a crazy amount of money on the day. It was like a 1 day thing. We raised like £4,000. The whole community came together. But what would happen is after the day went on, because people were counting live, people were like, right, okay, it's £200 every time you do like a couple of Lemps. And I'd set that distance. So I started visualizing as I was crawling, like people crawling out of rubble up ahead of me. So I just kept on crawling towards that image and just kept on like subjecting it forever. So when I did stop, I still was projecting that. All I could think about was that like one extra family that I could have helped. And I think a lot of that comes from naivety as well, you know, being like 18, 19, just moved to the big city from a much smaller city than Glasgow, meeting the big parkour community, lots of pressure. People were involved that I had only just met recently. A few years passed and I wanted to put that to bed. I was like, I need to do another event with a finished distance. And that's when the London Marathon came up. Rue and I joked and decided that we would do it. So initially I was raising money for my grandmother who was dying of cancer. She had quite an abusive childhood and requested that we changed it to NSPCC, which is what we've done. Yeah, Rue and I done the marathon, and training for that marathon was a nightmare because of Scottish weather.
Crucially, you've not mentioned that you did the marathon on stilts.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, I don't know. What's crazy as well, if you look at the original marathon page, when we first posted it, because I got my stilts sponsored, and I got my stilts like 3.5 months before, there's a picture of me standing on the stilt holding on to the lamppost because I was shiting it. I was like, I can't walk in these. But not to say we weren't physically prepared. We were very physically prepared for that. Lots of kettlebell training, working on hip strength, walking in a circle in a large room endlessly. And yeah, we'd done the marathon, kilts on stilts. So a few years passed and I started generating the idea to potentially balance across the channel to France. I was like, right, when I figure that one out, I'll do it. And so like, I was be like, do I stand on a boat? How can I do it? Do I get the channel tunnel to collaborate? And it became unrealistic and I left it. So fast forward last year, I'm in the Art of Retreat. I meet like Ben from Parkour One, Madeleine Coussel does her talk about Selena Parkour. So Madeleine is experienced and she's been in a psychiatric ward herself and now she works in one. And she did a presentation and she says she's trying to generate money to test these ideas. And I was like, I got an idea, I'll balance on a rail. And with the previous ones, this kind of links to my theatre practice. I've always seen them as quite performative in terms of an image. So initially we set out by putting in some arts applications and I was planning on doing the attempt in a museum and setting up like a performance art piece. Like the idea of balancing a rail and putting one leg in front of the other and getting up, and that has clear like kind of symbolic relations to people struggling with mental health. So meeting Madeleine, some experiences in my own life and with family members with mild to severe mental health situations. I was like, this is the one. The previous ones, it was with Haiti, and then the last one was my grandmother. But there was a bigger reason behind the rail marathon in terms of like the person that I was going to visualize. I imagine everyone listening to this right now has experienced someone that has either taken their life or attempted to take their life. So someone close to me done that. The combination of meeting Madeleine and doing that was like, I can do a rail marathon. And the reason I've said those things is simply because when you're building up to do like a large endurance event like this, it's all in your head. If someone put a gun to your head right now, Nina, and a gun to my head, even with my cami knee, we could run 50 miles. We could swap places from Glasgow to Edinburgh. There's lots of relevant stories like that. Eddie Hall, when he done the world record deadlift, he visited a hypnotist and had psychological like training. So when he went on the platform, he visualized the worst things that could possibly happen to his daughter and his wife. And that's how he lifted it. And I know this is dark, but when I got on that rail, or when I go in the marathon, or when I done like the crawl, the physical version of me would probably want to give up really quick. But if you can build yourself up psychologically, if you're ready to die before you go out there, you will do it. So I think the personal thing that like I've really missed from this event is I've always had like a really kind of like mental cleanse anytime I've done this sort of thing. And I had the same sort of feeling when I had my first mixed martial arts fight, my first boxing fight, and the first time I went on the stage. For a brief moment of time, I'd done something that I was so invested in, that I cared so much about, that I was willing to give everything in that moment. And it's a very hard thing to find. And I think it takes a combination of doing something that helps people, doing something for me that has some sort of display aspect to it, and doing something that you don't think you can do. And when you find a task that is related to those kind of three pillars, you can enter a really cool state. So for me, getting on that rail and doing a marathon and being really present and giving everything to something is definitely something that I missed that I couldn't do. But the large response that we've got, it has turned into something else quite beautiful, something that will be an annual event now.
The fact that you're talking about how it's as much about your challenge and you grappling with it personally as it is about the event, and the kind of fundraising support is almost like a way for you to have that experience, but also do it on behalf of, I guess, people you care about or issues you care about.
Yeah, I don't think I could push myself that far unless I had something like, there has to be something at the end of that journey, like there has to be.
You talked a little bit about like the stress your body was put under physically. Like I remember seeing one of your shows at uni, and like you finished the show by also getting beaten up by who was much more...
I tried not to get beat up, to be fair.
Okay, like it's a good effort, but you'd ask someone in who wasn't going to give you an easy ride, and you wanted it to be a great and stuff. And you've answered a little bit about like what motivates you to attempt these challenges and what motivates you to complete them, and like what you're visualizing the whole time. But can you pick up anything that's explains where they come from in the first place? Cat crawling a half marathon, doing a marathon on stilts, like rail balancing the channel or a marathon. The average person might not come up with that in a brainstorming session.
I think with things like the combat sports in particular, a lot of that came from, I never felt fully safe, maybe particularly in like the area that I grew up in, and some experiences that I've had. It always just made me really nervous. And also not being a particularly like violent person outside of sports, I always wondered how I could prepare. And it all comes back to the parkour practice of being strong to be useful. Like, I'm not going to go into saying what parkour is. We're very blessed that it doesn't exist with a solitary meaning. And I think that's a healthy thing for lots of disciplines moving forward as we go into the future, as new things come about. But yeah, so when I went into that first fight, and this is what I tried to communicate in the piece of theatre, I was so nervous. I'm like sweating with nerves. So I just turned 18 to give people some context. You can't fight at that time. You can now at 16 fight with larger guffs in MMA, but at the time, this is 10 years ago, it was still early days in the scene, so you had to be 18. I think it was like a week or 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, I was fighting a guy he was a man. When he hit me, I just realized that I didn't have to be scared anymore. And I think that the same with the marathon and endurance events, it's about knowing something about yourself so you can be happy with who you are, what you are or aren't capable of. I think with a lot of people that do maybe quite extreme things, these extreme highs also come with extreme lows as well. So to build yourself up to that moment is really exciting. Kind of bring forward to where we are today, where I'm a lot more interested in kind of like, I guess, like the performance aspects of it. I've always been really into durational performance art. So the audience kind of understand what that is. Performance art is, it's like looking at a painting, but it's got performers in it. And you might go in and they'll establish a couple of paintings for you. And they'll hold that painting for a long ass time. So what you get is a lot of people coming in and doing like a single action or an image for an extended period of time. And I've always been fascinated with that. A more relevant example might be like David Blaine standing in the ice cube or standing on the planet in Vertigo, who's like a huge inspiration of mine. So I've always looked at those events and thought I could place myself in them. But it just feels like you might as well raise some money while you're doing those things. And kind of what I was saying earlier, for me to get to that point, I do need a few factors involved. So I'd say that's more like the kind of the theory behind it. I think physically, why I do those sort of things, I feel like a lot of people are tend to be blessed with at least like one like mental or physical thing that they feel like they do really well. So whether that's that person that you meet that's never danced, but when you're on a night out, they do the splits, or like, you know, and it's just like, how can you do that? This makes no sense unless you're Jem in the parkour scene who done that and then wrecked his leg with bruises. Or you get some people that can nail a crossword. It doesn't have to be anything like particularly impressive. For me, endurance has always been like a relatively like easy thing. So Chris Grant, when he was training for a marathon, Sticky was running from Land's End to John O'Groats. I'm relatively new to the parkour scene, and Chris was like, do you want to come like run into Glasgow with me? And it was this big thing, everyone's involved, and Chris was like, do you want to do the longer run? And I'm like, no problem. And he kind of like bammed me up, and we're getting the train out to meet Sticky, and there's no trains in Aberdeen. Well, there is trains, but no one gets them. So I have no context for like how much distance is passing. I'm still pretty new in Glasgow at this point. And I just remember looking out the window and noticing how fast the train was going. It's just like, it's going to be bad. So I'd never ran more than like a mile or two, and I ran over 20 miles like into Glasgow with Chris, and we were running into like the city centre, and I turned to Chris and was just like, man, I can't do this anymore. I think I'm done. And then he was like, you've only got like 3 miles to go. It's like, I'm not running 3 miles, man. And he was just like, you've ran 18 miles. And I was like, oh, no way. And then I ran into town. So I guess there's the kind of like the theory and like the autobiographical that kind of goes behind why I can do these things. But I do think that I'm also got like decent like fundamental endurance. I think that I'm wired for it.
When you mentioned Sticky there, I was going to ask, because timing wise, that happened before any of your other big fundraising efforts, right?
I think so, yeah.
John goes to Paris in the end, is it not?
Yeah, that's nothing. He was going to run a marathon a day. I recall that he ran 50 miles on the first day just to make the rest of them seem easy. And he'd done parkour in every city that he arrived at.
You can actually maybe trace that in some of the stuff that you've done since, like seeing that early on.
Yeah, totally. There's lots of these, there's so many great athletes and performers out there that do all these kind of like mind-boggling things. So I think that your primary context is always yourself. As much as I could speak about how I've done those things, I still look to like Sticky, David Blaine, all these people, you know, that have done these things. So it doesn't feel so bad when I do it, you know? And I think that as a message out to everyone out there, you know, think of a challenge, think of someone maybe one step ahead of you and what they could achieve, and think about the person the next step ahead of them and try it and just give it a go. It doesn't matter if you can complete the distance or not. Like we said earlier, I never successfully done the cat call, but it's a hard thing to explain unless you've been there. But there's a really interesting thing the brain does There's a ultra marathon runner. I'm trying to remember her name. She's so famous, but she's essentially the greatest marathon runner ever. She does like 24-hour races. But what happens with these people that do back-to-back marathons or 24-hour races is they hallucinate. She'll speak about how for like 2 hours she can't see, and she has like a person pace set in front of her, and she's just looking at their back trying to follow them because she can't see properly. Every couple of hours she has a 3-minute nap. She lies down, closes her eyes, and then gets back up. So we've all got someone that we can get inspired by. There's always a next step, isn't there? There's always a next step.
So what I was going to ask about was, you talked a little bit about being an artist and how that links in. All these challenges have combined elements of not just parkour, but for you, a performance thing. Could you talk a bit about the links between your art and your parkour? What links them? What potentially separates them?
Yeah, I think that a lot of that has emerged from necessity initially. When I first started working full-time as a freelancer, a lot of my work came from, because I would do theatre jobs because I was the parkour guy, and I'd do parkour jobs because I was the theatre guy or gal, and like that's probably like on a financial point in terms of like paying rent and things like that. A lot of that began to emerge and strengthen from that, and I feel like the parkour is a daily practice that I have. I think one of the main differences between, if we call parkour a sport, God forbid for a second, versus say like a more traditional performance practice, is a lot of people in theatre, we don't go out 3-4 times a week and train theatre. You know, it's not a thing that exists. So having something like parkour has always been really grounding for me. And I've kind of like inherently found the space in between by just kind of practicing that regularly and keeping up with my theatre practice and beginning to find the connections. I think that why I've been pushing a lot of parkour work recently is that I've been in a lot of street theatre, circus shows and dance shows as the parkour specialist. Almost every time or every show I see in that context, they're saying, oh, we want some parkour people and we're doing a show about breaking free from the 9 to 5. And I'm like, how did you get funded? And it happens again and again and again. And one of the things that you see quite often is they'll use parkour practice in their choreographies. They'll want a big street set. So rather than finding a parkour spot, they'll spend all their money on building a set. As everyone knows, one of the inherent problems in the arts as a performer is these are the same people that are trying to game you out your wages a lot of the time, calling it an opportunity and things. So when I look at a £10,000 set for yet another performance about breaking free from the 9 to 5, and either myself or my friends have had a hard time even getting a fee out of them, it's clear to occupy that space for me. What I'd done to kind of develop that was I went and worked as a professional dancer. I worked professionally in the circus. And I worked in these different areas to kind of gain the experience I needed to have a cast or be able to put on performances and productions around that. So that's something that I'm still very much building at the moment. So that would be the connection. In terms of a more academic connection, there was a group called the Situationists, which was founded by Guy Debord in France, and I'm going to say the 50s or 60s. I should really know this. I think it's 50s, 60s. And what the Situationists would do was, it was a performance art movement that founded like the absurd reality of the everyday. So they would do something called the derive or drift, where they'd maybe walk through a city and they'd hold up a pen and everyone would stand and watch whatever they'd stopped to watch for 5 minutes to see the performative nature in people and the everyday. So this drift, this kind of new way of mapping out and looking at the city, stimulated academically a whole area known as psychogeography. So I feel that these performance artists in Paris, around that region at the time, created a fertile ground for parkour to exist in the first place. So this idea of the derive or drift, or doing something in a city that is non-normative, that is engaging with kind of architecture in the action that invites rather than what you've been told to do, I would argue is inherently performative. And I think that the parkour community has links all the way back to those early performance art movements in the 60s. So in terms of kind of my research, I do kind of see the through line between very abstract performance art practice group trying to change society to going into people using architecture in a new way for a physical discipline. I see the idea behind those arts. And I think that one of my final point on the matter would be parkour practitioners, I would say in my experience, are treated differently from other performers. I'm quite lucky to have performed in a lot of contexts and do my own shows and things like that. When you're hired as a parkour person to perform, you're not treated like a dancer, I can tell you that. You're not treated like an actor. You're this person that's doing this cool thing, and they're probably going to want you just to do a backflip anyway. So if we look at all the art forms that have emerged from the street, so to say, like breakdance and hip hop. It took a long time before that was kind of seen as a sovereign art form in its own sense. So something I've been pushing quite now and during quarantine, applying for a lot, is using that as a lens that parkour isn't treated like a sovereign art form. There is no parkour show about parkour. Parkour is glitter in a performance. Parkour is nothing else. So I think there's something inherently missing because of that.
I think that's really interesting, and particularly when you think about it in the context of the challenges that you've done, not looking at all like the kind of parkour that the director would ask you to do at the end of a show, you know, like
not at all. And
you're not going to say, oh, and instead of doing a backflip, actually, can you just do this really boring long thing that's the same for 14 hours?
Yeah, and then I think that like that's the kind of extreme performance art end that I do with the work. So like Nina, she was in residency for a show that I'm developing called Traceur, which is a parkour show about traceurs for traceurs. One of her parts in the show was we drew the audience faces on helium balloons, and we set ourselves up around the parkour spot, and we called out Nina saying like, you know, you think you're a hero, you think you're useful, you have 10 seconds, and we'd introduce the person that we'd drawn. And Nina would have X amount of time to get across the space and capture it. So each performer in it had these kind of different moments modeled around them. So yeah, it's kind of like I guess it's two different audiences. It's two completely different audiences. The kind of performance art spectrum into the more kind of like theatre kind of territory. I think they require different pieces of work. The rail marathon itself actually made me think of an artist called Francis Alice, who done a famous performance called When Faith Moves Mountains, where an entire community came together and they basically dug a bit of a sand dune and walked to the other sand dune. Like it's this giant mountainous one, and so over the course of a week they were able to move a mountain. So like that's like, so I really like these big actions, community actions, and kind of what they can mean. When you're working as an artist, you have to strike the balance between what you think you can get people to put money on the table for, because regardless of what people think, like there's a business side to this. There's the side of it that pays your rent and keeps you alive, you know. And there's obviously the projects that I would ideally like to do, and they certainly are interlinked. So a lot of it's about carefully choosing your pathway, so when the opportunity comes up to bring something to life that you've created or wanted to create, the groundwork is set for that. So you could say the same with the rail marathon. I wanted to do a performance art image about mental health, maybe crossing the channel. I wanted to do this big event. Okay, someone needs to raise some money. Okay, it's a parkour context. Okay, this is where I'm doing it. Okay, a museum won't take me. What does it become? The output isn't necessarily what you set out to do, but you have to engage in that journey a lot of times before that output is what you want it to be.
We've talked a little bit about the mental health aspect of this, and yeah, that parkour, like how parkour can be a metaphor for certain kinds of mental health practices, but also how creativity is linked to that as well. And one of the things I want to touch on is that at the moment, folk are stuck inside or in at least different situations than they would be normally. And people are increasingly realizing the value of their own creative expression and other people's if they're consuming it, and physical activity at whatever level it is. So I just wondered if you could chat a little bit about how you're coping.
I'm not in any extreme situation in terms of like I have a pleasant home life, for one. I remind myself that this is just how it is for everyone. I've engaged in quite a lot of different organizations and institutions are doing like one-on-one Skype coaching sessions about getting through coronavirus. I signed up for 2 of them explicitly because I knew the person was running it. I wanted to talk to them about something else. And when I signed up about it, I explicitly said, I'm not dealing with any extreme situations to get through this, but I want to learn from you about this. Can we talk about that instead? And they both said yes. So I learned about establishing a venue. I actually had a call about how to secure like a museum and how you go through that process. So I think that this is a really good time to understand that everyone is bored to tears and you can create some cool exchanges. So I've been trying to keep myself busy. Obviously the marathon quite suddenly on quite short notice turned into this kind of global thing, preoccupied a lot of my time. And other than that, I'm just kind of developing material, doing handstands, playing some games, trying to have some sort of a structure, you know, kind of getting up during the week, you know, staying up a bit later at the weekends. Little things like that are kind of keeping me going.
I wonder if you can bring out a little bit more and talk specifically about Soul Parkour for your instincts and kind of why they were the organizations you wanted to support in this.
Yeah, it connected to like the image I was trying to create. I really liked the work they were doing. I'll speak about a bit more about that in a moment. I like the people involved. And after raising money in the past for quite big charities, I was quite excited about raising money for much smaller charities. And in terms of what they do. So the members of both have experience and also work in hospital psychiatric units and various services with people that are in mental health crisis as it is. They also just happen to be parkour coaches. So what they're doing is they're tailoring sessions for those people, which I think is a really exciting kind of form of therapy. You know, we have lots of mainstream therapies in terms of psychologists. You know, medication's obviously a lifesaver for a lot of people, but I like that this can supplement that. And I think that it's really exciting that they're doing such a thing. And I guess that pushes parkour into yet another area, which is really cool.
Totally. The possibilities for parkour, I feel like, haven't even been close to tapped yet. And yeah, I think that's one good example of that. And hopefully there's still lots more to come, potentially, from folk like yourself.
Yeah, it's the same reason why we started Ukemi. So Ukemi, a company that I work with Tim Pierce and Daniel Smith, was we wanted to create a parkour company. Ironically, I'm wearing a t-shirt of Ukemi's, by the way. But anyway, we wanted to create a parkour company that didn't make t-shirts and didn't coach. Because there's nothing wrong with coaching. I coach, you know, there's nothing wrong with t-shirts. Some people are making really nice t-shirts. I'm just not interested anymore. Like, you know, when I first started out parkour 15 years ago, I swear I subscribed to every single person in the UK that done parkour. And I feel like if I was still that age now, I'd do the same with Instagram, but I'm just not as interested anymore. And not because it's not interesting, but because I've been saturated with that content and I've been saturated with being exposed to that. So when we created Ukemi, our big ethos is liminality. And I guess that extends to my art practice. So the limen is the threshold between which two things can exist. And if we imagine like the limen is like a long corridor, and I'll give the example of the Ukemi card game. We wanted to create a game that wasn't a digital game, that was a physical game. And we wanted to involve parkour. When we took one step down that corridor, we maybe had like someone come to a jam and like rolling dice for like a random chance. When we get to the other end of that corridor, we have people sitting down at a table playing with parkour figurines as like their character that moves across the board. So by exploring all that space in between, like what's the subtlest change to the most extreme change you can make to create a product, that's like a kind of ethos we've carried forward. So we've done the same with like, you know, lawn parkour. We have like the movement cards. And we're doing the same with creating spaces at the moment, which is quite exciting. We hopefully have 2 parks coming in the next couple of years in Glasgow, and we've done the exact same thing there. So we do the same with parks. Tim Pierce said something really exciting at one of our meetings for one of the parks that we're developing, where they're asking about what parkour equipment we wanted to design to make in it. And Tim says, no matter what you build, I'm going to jump on it. So why are we building a parkour park? So that gave us the ideas, and we started to integrate kind of designs from, you know, slackline and aerial, circus, outdoor classrooms, trials biking. How can you make an interesting set of structures that involve a variety of communities? And to be honest, with what we consider kind of behind the scene art better designs, there's barely any recognizable kind of parkour aspects in them. People listening at home, take parkour, choose one random thing that excites you in your life, get a big piece of paper, write parkour on one end and that thing on the other end. What's the single slightest change you can make that makes parkour a little bit more like that? And then do it from the other end as well. And along that chain, you're going to find kind of rich territory and plenty of ideas to work on. I think that's the same for any discipline, to be honest. I don't think it's limited to us at all. It's just we get excited about parkour, so why not?
Yeah, and there's maybe more of a blank canvas for parkour in some spaces because it's just not been exposed there.
I think you also have to be kind of like really careful about how you present that final thing. So there's a term called like lowering the threshold. And I think one of the big communities that's kind of suffered, especially the coaches, is a lot of us go into this territory of like, I don't do parkour, I do movement. I don't do martial arts, I do movement. And it is a really cool buzz thing, but if you're running like classes or services, despite that point I made, there is still a need to maybe call that a parkour class. You know, there's still like a need to make things recognizable. And this is why it comes back to the corridor. Find out what's suitable for your market or the community that you're trying to support. That's what makes things sometimes quite difficult, is you can kind of get ahead of yourself. And an example that we have with Ukemi is one of the parks that we designed is really brilliant, really out there. And it's really hard to communicate with people about that idea and why it's important. So we found ourselves with our kind of current collaborations actually annoyingly installing a couple of pieces of recognizable equipment. So when we build that park, the next park, we can kind of strip that away bit by bit.
Yeah, you got to work with whatever's in front of you, I guess, to an extent. And one of the places I think that we've started to see parkour's links with other areas more clearly is in events like the Art of Retreat, which obviously the European version did not happen this year in quite the same way, but you chatted about
Wow.
it was last year was where you came across Free Your Instinct and Soul Parkour, who you eventually ended up raising money for. That international element was baked in from the start. So even when it was just going to be you doing all the miles on the rail marathon yourself, you were always going to be raising money for organisations that were actually a little bit further afield, like not even Scotland and not even in the UK in the case of the latter. I wanted to check if that was something that was deliberate and how important that element was to you and the causes you're raising money for.
When I was kind of deciding to do it, the first thing I was checking was like what platforms would support international donations with gift aid for multiple countries, and the answer is that doesn't exist. So if there's a platform developer out there, create it. So at first I was considering kind of actually curveballing that, just choosing one, because it would have meant that the charities involved would have got 20% above the total, as opposed to like, I think the platform's going to take like a 2% fee. You know, like there's little shit like that kind of goes on. But I did feel like I was quite aware that they were in different countries and that they weren't necessarily going to benefit anything in Scotland. But outside a couple of groups, on Parkour Outreach being one, there's very few things in that theme that I could have supported in Scotland at the moment. I think it would have been more about raising money for somewhere like Access Parkour, you know, a parkour syllabus to do a specific like workshop with people in mental health crisis. I went for those other charities because they already had proof of concept and they could deliver work off the back of that donations, which could then be evidenced and kind of fed back to the people that have donated. So I think maybe the distance and the placement wasn't so much of a factor, but there were kind of like obviously like technical things, and there were decisions behind making the choices for those charities over like a Scottish charity that was just simply based around how far along they are comparatively to other groups doing similar things in Scotland.
That makes sense. But I guess in the end, it turned into a proper global effort and was more international.
Yeah.
You would have imagined. Would you say you're pleased about that fact?
Oh, definitely. For everyone like kind of out there as well, check out hashtag railmarathon on Instagram and you'll find out what a lot of people have also been doing in their own time. There's been like various blogs, you know, there's been a Skochi blog, there's been an Ends of Movement blog, there's been our Parkour Outreach blog, there's been a World of Parkour magazine blog. The decision's already been made that we're going to repeat this next year, which is really exciting. This has become an international thing on a very short notice, like a couple of weeks, because I got injured actually like maybe 2 months before the event. And I told the immediate people, but I was like, I need a week or two. I can't deal with this. Like it's too frustrating to deal with right now. But I needed that time to kind of come out with fresh energy. So next year we have all this evidence. We've got a big group cohort of people that are saying they're going to do it next year. Let me know your thoughts, everyone. Should we do 100 miles next year, or should we try and climb to space?
Just you, right? You on your own.
No. It's something stupid like 15,000 like 2-meter climb ups. I think it's way more than that. I looked up and then I realized that what I was looking up was actually kind of like the perimeter of space, not actual space. Yeah, outer atmosphere. So I think it's a crazy amount. I think why these images work really well for raising money, it reduces that kind of like that point of connection to what you're raising money for. Often we're raising money because people are suffering. That's the bottom line. Why a lot of people raise money. Unless you've experienced that suffering firsthand through your own experience or someone you know, or maybe your job, it's quite difficult for people to understand. By doing these kind of long, kind of arduous events, people have a face to put to that. Not to mean that you can't make it joyful. You know, the rail marathons turned into like quite a joyful thing, but everyone did have their individual challenges with it, and their connection and their group of people who know them. It isn't just this random person. They have a face to connect it to. I think that's a difficult thing when we were chatting earlier about these people in the world that are like doing crazy things, like, you know, running 100 miles at once. There's always going to be these exceptional people out there that can just do these things. So when you go to that donation page for that person, and they're like, yeah, I swam to France and back naked and didn't eat for a week before, you kind of get to the mindset of being like, well, I know you can do it because you've done that thing. Whereas what's been exciting about this is we've got lots of people that might not necessarily have done something like this before getting involved. It puts a face to the charity, it puts a face to the suffering. It creates a joyful connection. We ultimately raise more money. And so everyone listening, I'd love you to get involved next year. And the reason why it's important that you get involved is because only you can engage the circle around you. No one else can do that. Like, I can't do that. Nina can't do that. Anyone involved in this marathon can't do that. So what's different about this to a solo attempt, to a group event, is all you people listening right now saying, I'm going to get involved and I'm going to do it next year.
If you can't wait that long, I guess you can start practicing if you're allowed out.
Yeah.
And there's also
It's weird that we never mentioned, like there was a discussion behind the scenes on how we would safely social distance and like people being like, I want to do it, but if someone comes, I'm going to have to leave. And we're like, that's cool. Some people were delayed. Some people had to do it a day before. Yeah, it's really strange that we juggled all that hurdles, but never mentioned it once. But yeah, we all done it in isolation, everyone safely. And it was a nightmare, but we got it done.
I think it's kind of classic parkour fashion, just more obstacles to overcome. So the fundraiser itself for this rail marathon, and there was going to be another one, it's going to be live for a little bit longer, right?
Yeah, so it's going to be live in probably till the end of the month. So we have a couple more blogs and articles coming. I'm going on another podcast to talk about it, and we have some sharing still to do. Essentially, as things dry out, if we don't get a donation for a couple of weeks, we'll close the page there. We have hit our funding target of £2,000. But just to let you know, that is a large amount of money. It's really exciting, but it's just an arbitrary number. Whatever we raise will get used for those charities. So don't think because we're already at the funding target that money's going to get, thrown down the drain. It just means that they can kind of do even more. It might be the difference between, 3 courses and 4 courses. And if you can't donate, this is a pressing time financially for everyone. Share the event. They say with branding and things like that, you have to see a brand 7 times in glancing before you can recognize it. So even if you share it and you're like, but no one interacts with me and no one sees it, you might be one of those 7 glances that someone has that they're like, this thing keeps coming up. I'm going to go check it out and support it. There's benefits no matter how small or large your reach is.
Or I guess you can persuade 6 other mates to conveniently post at a similar time and hit that 7.
Yeah, it's like pyramid scheme, the charity marketing methods. It's basically Avon, isn't it?
In all seriousness, thanks so much for making time to chat. I've obviously known you for a while and chatted to you about all the various strange challenges you've done before in the past, but I still think it's really interesting. I think other people will too, finding out what's behind it and what's inside your daft head.
I hope so, yeah.
We'll leave it there, I think, and encourage everyone to still donate if you can, share the event if you can, and if you can't do either of those things, then you can look out for more rail marathon news, I guess, in about a year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.